Comprehensible input doesn't work. Most people who rely on comprehensible input to learn a language never actually become fluent. They think watching videos, listening to podcasts, and reading books is enough, but it's really not. And I'm going to explain why. Input is a good way to review what you've already learned, not a good way to learn things from scratch. Comprehensible input doesn't work. Or more precisely, it does work, but only if the input is actually comprehensible, and it only works as a part of a bigger system. And here's the catch. If you already know enough vocabulary to make the input comprehensible, then the inputs will make sense, but we'll understand it. But are you learning anything if you already know the words? And if you don't know enough words, you're just guessing what the input means. So you're not learning anything, or you're learning very little after a lot of exposure. So if you're starting from zero, input is extremely inefficient. You're wasting your time, especially if you're just doing that. Input is a good way to review what you've already learned, not a good way to learn things from scratch. And I see lots of people who want to believe in this. Like, input is the only thing you need, comprehensible input, blah, blah, blah. And they want to believe in this because they want it to be easy. They don't want to do the work. They don't want to actually have to study or to do exercises that are frustrating, difficult, and actually suck. They don't want to grind. They want to do things that are fun and easy. And nothing worth doing, nothing valuable, gets done by doing things that are fun and easy. But these people who believe in comprehensible inputs as basically as fanatics, like they are in a cult, really want to believe that listening to the language is the only thing, watching videos in the language is the only thing you need to do in order to become fluent. And the reality of it is that it doesn't work like that. The reality of it is that you can't learn to speak well, fluently, by watching videos or by listening or by reading. You need to do a lot of speaking practice. And you can't learn vocabulary fast enough either just by watching videos or, again, listening. It does help. It does help you review the vocab that you've already learned. But in order to learn new vocab, which is extremely important, especially in the beginning, it's extremely slow. Input is good for grammar. You learn grammar in context relatively easily with lots of input, but only if you already know vocabulary. If you don't know enough words, you will not understand. So the input will be either really boring for a very long time because you'll have to stick to beginner content for a really, really long time. The same boring, dumbed down stories again and again for years. Or it'll be impossible to understand because you'll try to understand interesting content, but it will be way too complicated because you don't know enough words. So you need to focus on learning enough words. First order of business should be to learn as many words as possible, then do inputs to review those words. And that's what you need to do. You need to combine vocabulary learning with input. You learn lots of words, as many of them as possible, ideally using mnemonics. It's the most efficient way of doing it. You learn vocabulary lists, the most common words in the language, and also the vocabulary of the specific things you want to read, listen, and watch. You get vocabulary lists of the content and you memorize those words before getting exposed to the content so that you understand way more of it when you are actually doing the input. You make it more comprehensible from the beginning by reviewing the vocab first, and then you do the input. I'm not against input. Input is necessary. Input is important. It's an important part of language learning, but it needs to make sense. It needs to be strategic. You can't just throw stuff at the wall and hope that something sticks. You need to do it in a way that makes sense. And the other big problem with input is the truth that all these people don't want to hear. You don't get good at speaking by not speaking. You get good at speaking by doing a lot of speaking practice. You get good at anything only if you practice it a lot. You read a lot, okay, you get good at reading. You listen a lot, you get good at listening. If you don't speak a lot, you don't get good at speaking. Even if you know the words and you understand the grammar and you understand everything when you're listening, if you've never trained your mouth to produce the language, you'll freeze, you'll hesitate, you'll sound awkward, you'll make tons of mistakes. Now, maybe if you're super extroverted and shameless, you might power through it anyway, but if you actually want to sound good, you want to speak clearly, confidently, accurately, you need to practice. But if you actually want to sound good, to speak clearly, confidently, accurately, you need to practice speaking on purpose. Deliberate practice. Shadowing. Listening and repeating. Lots of reps. Deliberate practice with feedback. You listen, you repeat, you try again, over and over again. You use language islands. You do speaking drills. 4, 3, 2. You do Q&A exercises, things like that. This doesn't take too much time of the day, but it's hard work, so people avoid it. But if you skip this, your speaking will always suck. I mean, look at the people who learn by input only. They all suck at speaking. Yes, okay, they did thousands of hours of inputs and they understand pretty well. And when they try to speak, it's a disaster. Why? Because they don't practice speaking. So long story short, you need to learn a lot of vocabulary. And yes, you need input, but you also need a lot of output. And you need deliberate practice for your speaking. English is not my first language, but it's pretty good, right? This is because I did a lot of deliberate practice for my English. So if you want to actually get good at speaking a language, you should start training. Like you mean it.